this month, many of us are going to be heading to New York. And in New York, heads of state will be gathering from September 24th, 25th through September 27th. And in New York, they're going to be adopting the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals build from the Millennium Development Goals, which expire this year. Now, unlike the process of the SDGs and how those were developed, which were essentially a few very smart people in the basement of the UN, the process for development for the SDGs has been a multi-year process. It's been highly participatory, and everyone has been invited and encouraged to participate in some form or fashion. We have 17 goals, and we have 168 targets.
Fine.
So in a few weeks, heads of state will be coming together not to wordsmith, not to debate the goals and targets, but in fact, they're coming together to adopt and get on with the real work. The real work, which will include collaboration and insights from a variety of institutions and individuals to build on indicators that align with the targets and also the very real and complex work of activation and implementation. This week, United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are people-centered and planet-sensitive, and that no one should be left behind. And I think that's critical. For no one to be left behind, we need deliberate and coordinated action. We need to understand the mechanisms for financing. We also need to ensure accountability. These are the topics that I'm hoping to discuss with you today. These and more, your advice, your insights on what we need to take with us down the road to New York, up the road to New York, in New York, and beyond. In a few minutes, we're going to have our panelists make some introductions. I hope that we have a very lively and engaging discussion and debate. We're going to open it up to the floor for questions and comments, as well as those who are online. And those who are online can submit their comments or questions via Twitter using the hashtag #AskIFPRI. And a gentle reminder, if you haven't done so already, if you will please silence your electronic devices. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists. Francisco Ferreira, who to his friends is also known as Chico. So you should all feel free to call him Chico. Is senior advisor in the Development Research Group of the World Bank. He's published widely in the fields of poverty and inequality in developing countries and served as chief economist for Africa. He also co-directed the 2006 World Development Report on Equity and Development. Homi Kharas. Homi is Senior Fellow and Deputy Director for the Global Economy and Development Program at the Brookings Institution. He's advised the Secretary General on the post-2015 development agenda and served as Chief Economist for the World Bank's East Asia and Pacific region. Claudia Ringler is the Deputy Division Director of Environment and Production Technology Division at IFPRI. Claudia co-leads IFPRI's water research program and has extensive field research in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, working on natural resource management and agricultural technology policy. Andrew Steer is President and CEO of World Resources Institute. Andrew was Director at the UK Department of International Development, DFID, and Special Envoy for Climate Change at the World Bank. He also serves as Executive Board of the UN Secretary General's Sustainable Energy for All initiative. And last but not least, Schengen Fan, who's Director General at IFPRI. Schengen has conducted extensive research on pro-poor development strategies in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Schengen serves as Vice Chairman of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council on Food and Nutrition Security, and he recently received the Hunger Hero Award from the World Food Program in recognition of his commitment to fighting hunger around the world. So welcome. So I'd like to now turn things over to each of you. And again, I hope we have a very lively discussion, interject, debate, and those of you here and online, please be thinking of comments and questions that you would like to ask our panelists as well. So we're going to start off with a few introductory remarks from each of you. And we'll start with Francisco and go down. So first question, How have you and your organization engaged with the development of the SDGs? And what goals and targets are you keeping your eyes on?
So the bank generally has been engaged in the process. You know, it's not on the driver's seat. The driver's seat is the UN. But the bank has, of course, been advising and commenting and paying attention to it. And in particular, two goals, which align very closely with the bank's own goals. About 2 years ago, I think, we've kind of reoriented all of the bank's work around what we call the twin goals of poverty eradication, which is the same as goal 1 in the SDGs, and the promotion of shared prosperity, by which we mean the promotion of faster growth for the bottom 40% in each country. So the first goal is global. It's about eliminating, well, in our case, we're a bit less ambitious, and I'll come back to that. It's driving to 3% by 2030, the number of people living under $1.25 a day by the old line. That line, by the way, is about to change, or the number of that line is about to change the way the bank measures it, because we're now using a new set of PPP exchange rates, but we've capped the line so that it's equivalent in real terms to $1.25, in part because both our goals and the SDGs are couched in terms of the $1.25 goal. So that's one goal. And then the other, the shared prosperity goal is kind of the first target under goal 10, which is the inequality goal, right? Now, as to the second part of your question, what goals I think we, and I in particular, are keeping our eyes on most closely, it's probably those two, the poverty and inequality goals. And what I personally find exciting about the SDGs is that, unlike the MDGs, they feature inequality, the distribution of things, front and center. You know, Amartya Sen and others would have easily said, look, one problem with MDG 1 was that if you want to maximize just moving the number of people out of poverty, you can just move the ones closest to the line, right? You don't have to worry about the bottom. That's been corrected in some sense, and now there's a real concern with inequality. And I want to end these introductory remarks by just saying that those two goals aren't only intrinsically important in their own right, individually, but also they're closely connected. And they're closely connected because in order to reach the first goal, even our first goal, which is 3%, let alone the more ambitious SDG, which is 0% by 2030, if countries keep growing at the same rate as they've grown in the last 10 to 20 years, we're not going to make it with the inequality unchanged. Bear in mind that the last 10 years were extremely good years in terms of growth. If you look at what's happening in China now and elsewhere, it's much less, you know, it's actually quite optimistic to think that we'd grow at the same rate. But if we grow at the same rate as we've grown in the last 20 years, with no change in distribution, with no change in inequality, we'd make it to about 6%. So we need to promote shared prosperity, as we say it, or to reduce inequality, because otherwise we're not going to make those. So those two goals, although they're independent and they're separate, they're closely related, and one is very needed for the other. And that's what's most exciting to me, is now the focus on distribution, on development from the bottom up.
So I got started with the SDGs as the lead author and executive secretary of something called the high-level panel that was advising the Secretary General on what should come after the MDGs. So we issued that report in May of 2013, and then there's been a whole sort of series of processes and negotiations of member states to get us to this point. But after sort of, working on that report, I started to then think about how we actually going to implement this, and how do we use a goals, targets framework to actually drive action. And so for the last couple of years, I've been working on a project called End Rural Hunger. And we've focused heavily, obviously, on SDG Goal 2, and just tried to ask the simple question, can we actually measure the targets? Once we start to do that, what does the data tell us? And then what are the other things that we need to measure? Because if you only look at the targets and say things aren't going well, it's not terribly actionable. It's information, but just information for information's sake. So that I think there are a whole series of other things that you need to know in order for things to be actionable. And that means disaggregating the data at a minimum to a country level. It means, I think, looking at policies and the policy framework, because it's very difficult, to be honest, to cost these things, because the amount of money really depends on the environment in the country and the context into which that money is being put. So we've developed a framework which looks at needs, policies, and resources and tries to put them together in one place. And I think that's something that typically is not done, because the people who look at the needs, if you like, the MDG monitoring stuff, that was all done by the UN. And then people like the World Bank look a little bit at, policies, but heavily at the resource side of things, and people like FAO look at the policy side of things. They don't bring it all together. So just, if you take one indicator, like take undernourishment that FAO puts out, we're at 12.9% of the population in developing countries undernourished. On current trends, we'll get to 7.9%. If you want to get to zero, that basically means you've got to accelerate the rate of progress by, roughly 2 to 3 times. And you can do that indicator by indicator. You can do that with stunting. You can do that with agricultural yields. You can do that with lots of different things. So it gives you a notion of the scale of the challenge. But then what we do is say, well, okay, is this actually feasible? And I think the good news on that is that it is feasible. There are lots of things that we can do, and actually conditions are quite propitious. So we have probably today the least distorted agriculture in both developed countries and developing countries that we've had in generations. I mean, the size of producer and consumer subsidies in developed countries, which today is about $250 billion per year on their own farmers, compared to $11 billion of aid to food and nutrition security going to the whole of the developing world. There's a lot that you can do with that. So we basically go through and say, this is how you could move on the policy front. This is how you could move on the resource front. These are the countries where very specific attention needs to be paid. And then within food and nutrition security, you actually have lots of different, sub-issues. The malnutrition issue is quite different from the undernourishment issue. Both of those are different from the issue of small-scale, smallholder yields. And all of that is different from sustainability and resilience for agriculture and dealing with climate change. So you have to be very careful about really identifying what is it that you mean specifically for food and nutrition security, and then thinking about strategies to get there.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to unpack some of this further in our upcoming questions. Claudia, I'd love your thoughts on this initial question.
Yep. Thank you. I'll leave the overall IFPRI engagement with the SDGs to Schengen, as he's on the panel. And I'll just focus on some of the activities and how this SDG process and the goals and targets relate to my division, the Environment and Production Technology Division. Basically, our mandate, is to sustainably enhance food production while reducing the environmental footprint of production. So I believe it squarely fits in with the SDGs. As we all know, most of the environmental challenges in the world come from agricultural production systems, and therefore the scope of reducing negative environmental impacts, environmental degradation, scarcity of natural resource use, etc., the largest scope for improvements also comes from the agriculture sector. So I think we are really very much called upon to work both with the SDG process and with the countries to identify and implement solutions along these agriculture environment nexus. And our division basically focuses on the science and technology policy underlying these agriculture processes, because it's really very much a policy driven environment to make a change, to institute differences. We're also looking at the spatial data and analytics underlying agricultural production processes, the natural resource management policy and institutions govern those policies is really essential to make a difference, particularly in developing countries. And finally, obviously, the important forward-looking element, because if we are not aware how population, economic growth, climate change affect future agriculture technologies, management strategies, dietary change, then we obviously will probably invest in the wrong direction. So I believe our division is very much squarely focused on achieving all SDG results related to the environment and agriculture.
Andrew.
Well, the World Resource Institute has devoted most of our energies to trying to get an integration between the natural resource and environmental side of the shop and what traditionally has been the development side of the shop. And I think we all know that the MDGs were very successful in many areas, but the way they treated the environment was very weak. They had a special self-standing environment pillar, or MDG. That was the woolliest and weakest of all. And as a result, really, we didn't see the benefits of the MDGs for the environment. So what we've tried to do with others is to show how the environmental side can be integrated into the actual design of the goals and the targets. And so one of the things that we've done together with others, we've seek to depoliticize the process. So we've convened 7 informal retreats at the weekends for members of the ad hoc working group, precisely because when they sit in conference rooms at the United Nations, they tend to politicize things in an extremely unhelpful way. And when you take them away to a nice retreat center in informal clothes, they actually can really make some progress. We are pleased with the outcome. In terms of the areas that we're looking at, particularly at the World Resource Institute, our motto is count it, change it, scale it. So we love counting things. And so we're trying to be helpful in that regard. So for example, in forestry, we're the keepers, together with Google and other partners, of sort of up-to-date data on anyone who has a laptop worldwide can see exactly what's happening to deforestation in real time, and you can monitor in a very, very direct way. That will transform the way that that particular sustainable development goal. So too on the climate side of things, we're the keepers of the official way that you measure greenhouse gas emissions. It's called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, and it's for companies, it's for cities, and it's for countries. So too together, and also IFPRI as well is very good at this, on water. We have very detailed data and mapping projections on 15,000 the 15,000 largest water basins in the world. So we know all the volume, all the quality, all the quantity, and we project then according to IPCC scenarios. So for us, data is very important, and perhaps we can come back to that a little bit later.
Yeah, and actually with the MDGs, the environment goal was a last-minute add-in. They almost forgot about it. So we've come a long way thanks to efforts from organizations like yours. Shengen.
Well, let me welcome you to IFPRI. Yes. If you use a temperature, you still know that we're in summer. We're supposed to be in break. You have come back, and let me welcome you. Thank you for coming. And also our panelists, particularly our moderator, Nabiha. So we are on the way to New York. Many of us will be in New York. We wanted to hear from you. After our discussion, I hope we can hear from you. What are the key messages you want us to bring to New York, to engage with global agenda, to cut hunger, malnutrition, poverty, to protect our environment, make sure that climate change will be in the Bay? So what will be the IFPRI's role, or what has been the IFPRI's role in supporting the SDGs? Well, IFPRI is a research organization. So the butter and the bread is data, analysis, and knowledge. So we have been using the knowledge, data, and analysis in supporting various initiatives. For example, our Global Nutrition Report, you might remember, our Global Hunger Index report, our research reports, our books, data, all contribute to the whole process. So It's not one particular event or one particular conference. It's a whole process. I think you might have used IFPRI's research results or data to reshape your thinking or your indicators. But more particularly, we are very much focused on food and nutrition security, the number 2 goal. So I'm so happy that this time we separate poverty and hunger goals into two different ones to really highlight how important the nutrition, food security goals are. My engagement with the whole process started probably April 2013 when the Spanish government, the Colombian government, and the UN Secretary General co-hosted a high-level consultation on food and nutrition security. So the heads of the UN agencies on food and agriculture were there. Ban Ki-moon also came, and IFPRI came to provide certain research technical support. At that time, Ban Ki-moon's ambition is to have zero hunger by zero hunger. Then I challenged him, hey, by what time zero hunger? And he said, well, in our lifetime. I said, lifetime is not that precise. In one generation, a generation used to be 20 years, right? But now it could be 30 years or even 35. Then David Nabarro and others asked me, said, hey, what do you please think? What would be a very realistic but a very ambitious year we can achieve, not necessarily absolute zero hunger. Zero hunger is not possible. Zero poverty is also not possible. Let's say if we can achieve almost zero hunger, let's say 5%, 5%, this is the rate the European Union or even US still have, then we can be very proud that we almost achieved zero hunger. So we come out with 2025, 5 years before 2030. Can we do it? Yes, we can. But we got to use the data, research evidence. We got to mobilize community to work together to achieve that target by 2025.